Okay guys, I'm going to try and show you the next part. I'm trying to do this live so you can really see that it hasn't been edited. This is really what it looks like. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have problems with light again. So, I wonder if I could put it over here so I can use both hands. There, now I have both hands, and so hopefully I can show you a little better. It can be awkward, and the right tools make a huge difference, and I hope you can hear me over the boiling water. Alright, so when you are lifting canning jars out, you do want a canning jar lifter, and you want to make sure you have a really good hold on it. These are also really nice because I have lids in here. And again, I'm not scalding these so that I can can with them. I'm scalding them so that they are safe to use for just storing food in or to put drinking water in. Hey, off-grid lifestyle. So I'm going to try and show you. I do have two jars. I have two jars in there. You don't want them clinking against each other. And this is not a hot pack canner. This is just a standard pot. All right, so you don't change your water out in between each batch. As long as the jars that you are sterilizing are already clean, the water stays clean. And then after we do this, we use that water the rest of the day to wash dishes or at night to take our baths with. So it stays in the pot until we use it, but then we use the pot as we take it out for multiple things. So there's the lids. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see the lids? There's the lids. I'm wondering if you could see better. Let's see. Let's see if we can open the window. It's getting hot in here. Is that better? Can you see better now? Okay. So now I'm going to take one jar out, and I need to dump the water out. When you do that, you can't have a little sissy grip on this. It has to clamp down on that jar because you don't want to slip. It's boiling water. You don't want it coming out of your hand, but you also don't want the water coming out with it because you're going to reuse it. Whoops, that's not the right one. Okay, this is for jars. It doesn't work well for lids. And it does get noisy when it has jars in there because there's a little bit of vibration with the jars. And there's these little magnets on the end of a stick you can get that also help get the lids out, but you know, the tongs work just as well. Hot, 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 hot. So one thing I wanted to point out. A lot of tools are very nice to have and they work, but that doesn't mean they're essential, especially if you're minimalist or off-grid or trying to live very traditionally. The fewer things you have around that are clutter, the easier your job is going to be. So even though that little magnet on the end of a stick is really nice, I can use these to get spaghetti out of a pot too, and so I use these. And I don't keep the little magnet thing because it takes up space and I have to keep track of it. All right, I've got this jar heated up. I had washed it and then I put hot water in the bottom to warm the jar up. Oops, I think that one may have actually cracked. I heard a crack. It may not have been warm enough. So if you hear that, that is the sound that you hear if you had, if you went from too cold, if my jar was not hot enough when I put it into the hot water, if the water I had put in it didn't heat the jar up enough, you'll hear that little teeny crack, and it means that your jar just cracked and you need to kind of pull it out and look at it. And that's the wrong. Use the right tool. And I don't like that sound. A lot of times what will happen when you hear that sound, it'll be the bottom that cracked. Yep, I got a crack in it. Right there. Can you see that line? That's what happens if you don't have your jar hot enough when you put it in. So I just ruined that jar. So I'm glad you got to see that. I've been doing this for years and I can still ruin a jar. A lot of times if it already has a crack in it, that'll be the weak spot and that's where it'll crack. Because the bottom of the jar was warm. It was the top of the jar that wasn't really as warm. So when that happens, you throw it away. And what that means is I might wait Another thing I can do is I can take some cold water and put it into the hot water so that it kind of mellows the temperature out. And then I'm going to take some hot water and pour it into the water that has maybe cooled a little bit inside my jars so that the jar comes back up to temperature. But that's the death of your canning jars, is going from cold to hot or hot to cold. That's what cracks them. So you can see my workstation is not wonderful right now. These are all clean, but these are lemons. And this is my rack. I'm going to let these dry out a little bit and then I'm going to put them up. And these are my jars that I've already finished. If you're having a lot of jars crack, I would say make sure that the jars are exactly the same temperature as the water you're putting them into, and then bring the temperature up. It's more laborious, it takes more time to do that, but it'll save your jars. So hopefully that was helpful again. I'm sorry I had to do it in two parts, but I had to run out and pump water really quick. So you don't need fancy pots in order to do hot pack canning because it's the heat and the boiling water, but what you do want is something in the bottom that'll keep the jars from clinking against each other. Thankfully you weren't canning food when it cracked. Well, that's the thing, it's not a big deal. It happens a lot. One of the things that happens a lot in canning is you'll get your jars in, there's hot food on the inside, there's hot water on the outside, you put them in and they boil. And sometimes, if those jars have a little nick in them, it will crack. And it happens. It's just something that happens when you're canning. Even in a pressure canner, it's not a big deal. It's not like the jar explodes, it just cracks. It ruins a jar of food. It's why you always want to check along the top for nicks. You want to check for cracks in the jar itself before you start, because then it does waste your time, it does waste food, but it happens to everybody and it's not a big deal. A lot of times you can get canning jars at secondhand stores. If you do, you always want to sterilize them. You want to check them for nicks. You really don't know what people use those jars for. I prefer to buy brand new jars or get them from family, because at least then I know there wasn't something creepy in them, or chemicals. You just never know. Somebody could have used them for chemicals. So hopefully that was helpful. A lot of the jars I use are things like pickle jars, or what other kind of jars? If I have to buy something commercial, I always buy it in glass because I can reuse it. And you go through enough glass jars when you're canning, and if you're trying to avoid plastic, that you can always use them. So hopefully that was helpful. That's how you sterilize them. And slow up, slow down as far as cooling and heating. And even if you've been doing this for years, you can still have things crack. Do your best. So we'll talk to you later. I am going to try and do the hotbeds again today, but it probably won't be a live show. I might record it and then save it for tomorrow. Are we enjoying the tiny house? Yes. I feel a lot of peace here at the tiny house because I can do a lot of projects, but I can do them really slowly. And that's going to try and boil again. Yep, I got to get back to work. 'Kay.